Alright, everybody, welcome to our next game dev discussion here on the Game Wisdom channel. I'm, of course, Josh Placer, and we have another interesting chat for you tonight. My guest is an indie developer as well as doing work in terms of servers and server architecture for the game RuneScape. And he's on tonight to kind of talk about some of the work that goes into all this and hopefully demystify some of the myths when it comes to multiplayer architecture and design. So please welcome to the cast from SideQuest Ninja, Chris Knowles.
Hello. Yes, it's good to be here. Nice to see you all. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm British. I live in the UK, in Cambridge. I've been in the industry for 12 years. All that time at Jagex, who make RuneScape. But late last year, I also went part-time to go indie. So I now do both of those things, and I wear both of those hats. Yeah.
All right. It is a pleasure to have you on, Chris. We've been talking on Twitter about getting things set up. Chris got in touch with me, and like I said, we're always happy and looking for developers to come on and talk about their experience. So again, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So, with that said, we already kind of went through a little bit of your intro, but for people watching us live or recorded, could you talk a little bit about kind of your role at Jagex and kind of what we're going to be discussing for our topic today?
So right now, my title is I'm a senior engine developer on RuneScape. So I'm in the team that's responsible for keeping all the servers up and running, for adding new features, occasionally dabbling in the client where sometimes when you're doing something to a server, you need to make the corresponding change in the client, so you end up doing both of those things. But I've shipped 3 other games while I've been there. One was a very small game called Shattered Plans, which was, goodness me, it was a bit like Risk in Space in a sort of mini games website we had nearly 10 years ago. And a game called 8 Realms, which was a web-based game, which was one of those sort of, it's a bit like Travian, but with extra features, that sort of era of game. And also Chronicle RuneScape Legends, which was a digital card game using the RuneScape IP, which of course immediately make everyone think it's just like Hearthstone, which it wasn't. But mechanics were different. But for 8 Realms and for Chronicle, I got to, I was sort of tasked with designing the servers kind of from the ground up. And then over the course of a couple of years, we built them, which as far as I'm concerned, that was job satisfaction right there. So I've designed servers for games a couple of times, and I've worked a lot on RuneScape, which obviously is a long-standing MMO with all kinds of legacy fun and games going on as well. So I mean, we can chat about all kind of levels of server development, from infrastructure and like how many physical machines do you need in a certain place, how's your networking going to work, how do you lay out your code structure, what things does your server need to have to not fall over and to deal with players trying to bring it down, because players are like that sometimes, dealing with bugs and that kind of thing. So yeah, we can go in at kind of various levels as the mood takes us.
And like I was telling Chris before, I am definitely not the hardware guy. That's not kind of where my brain goes. So a lot of my questions, I'm sure, are going to be on the stupid side of things. But for the chat watching, if you're watching this live or record, if you do have any questions, a lot more on the technical side, definitely leave them either in chat or in the comments, and we'll hopefully try and get to them down the line. So I guess to begin with, one thing that I was hoping you could kind of dispel the myth of, because we've had this kind of fun, I guess, quote-unquote, fun kind of topic. Like last year, somebody made the meme about how multiplayer is easy. Any developer can do it in a weekend. And it's become a very popular thing that we make fun of here on the channel. So, with somebody who has a background designing and maintaining servers, I just want to ask you, can you do multiplayer in 2 days? Is it that simple?
No. I mean, the absolute worst case scenario for any game developer is you've made this nice single player game and someone in senior management comes to you and says, that's really cool, could you just put some multiplayer in it for us? Because the whole way you go about building your game is totally different if you know you're going to be doing multiplayer as well. The way you structure everything changes. And you could maybe you could hack together in 2 days a game that sort of did some stuff in the office with low lag and everyone playing nice, but you throw that into the world, it's going to be an absolute disaster once it hits real situations.
Yeah. And again, like this is one of those conversations. Like you said, like some people are just like, just add multiplayer. It just automatically works. Or the other thing I like here, like, there's just a button on Unity. You just push that button, and it immediately creates your entire server architecture, and you're done.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can get quite, particularly with like Unreal. I mean, it's designed to be an online FPS engine. That's kind of what it does. So you can get quite a long way, kind of out of the gate with that, because that's if you decided you want to make an online FPS, you're kind of going with the flow, so it's easier. But even so, you're gonna have to do an awful lot of work to get
Yeah.
your game working.
And one thing that you said that I want to clarify for people watching
Hmm.
this is that there is a difference between saying, I want to do multiplayer, and that is, day one of my project, I'm going to build a game around it, versus saying, my game is 80% done, let's add a multiplayer option right now or this very second.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's kind of the worst kind of feature creep you can have, because you're just kind of, yeah. So many things would change. Yeah, if you want to make a multiplayer game, set out with that idea. Um, yeah, yeah.
And one of my friends, Thorn in chat, left this question. He's working on, I think, he's working on his first like mobile game right now. So he's asking, with things like Photon offering cloud services for multiplayer, is that a good new option for small scale developers, or is it easy enough to stick with coding dedicated servers?
So, I mean, the only time I've used Photon was for a prototype that we made many years ago. So we worked on it for 6 months. The company decided we weren't going to take it forward, which happens quite a lot. And so we used it there. I, I believe it's come on quite a long way since then. But I think, yeah, if you're looking for a kind of pre-built solution that sort of deals with a lot of the hoops you're going to have to jump through, I think Photon is kind of considered the de facto standard. It does most of the things you want. So, yeah, if you're not doing anything, particularly wacky, then yeah, it probably is a good place to start. And yeah, it's not a daft idea.
Okay. And like I said, like as somebody who's obviously played a lot of video games, I've looked, I've looked at things from kind of the consumer standpoint. But it's very rare, at least for myself, to have discussion more on the back end or hardware side. So, and again, like this is one of those things that I think is a really great topic as kind of like that middle ground from a consumer to a developer standpoint, because most people don't think about server architecture. It's not exactly something that a gamer thinks about when they're loading up Overwatch or they're thinking about playing the next Call of Duty. So I guess this is one of my novice questions for you. What would you say is kind of the, I guess, biggest misconception about building a multiplayer architecture? Like something that maybe an indie developer or developer has asked you, or something that you've seen other developers struggle with when they think to themselves, "I want to make my game multiplayer. Now what?"
Yeah, I mean, the thing that you often hear, if players are going to complain about anything, they're going to say, "Oh, the netcode in this game is awful," which might be true. But the idea that that's kind of all there is. That's if you get that right, everything's fine. It is perhaps the biggest misconception. It's not just about passing packets back and forth in a sensible manner, which in some ways it actually isn't that hard. The extra complexity is dealing with things like lag compensation. So people on different pings. If you've got a half-second ping, where you're shooting on your screen isn't where the person actually is, but the server needs to kind of work out that. Well, we'll say you shot that person in the head because on your screen you did, so that's kind of fair. That's always a challenge. But there'll be all kinds of challenges. Just like whatever simulation your game server is running, it needs to do it quickly because it needs to be able to take information from the player or the players, work out what the new state is, send it out to people as quickly as possible. So the performance of your server is always a big thing. It's not just the netcode. You've got to look. I mean, it's hard to think in many ways of a piece of software that has more moving pieces all working together than something like an MMO, where you've got all the clients, you've got a bunch of servers that may be instanced or in some way communicating with each other. You've got the way of saving, all the players' data somewhere else that's hopefully very, very safe and backed up
Mm-hmm.
6 different ways. The number of things that have to come together is substantial. Yeah.
And I think with that, I think that's another very important point is that if we're talking about building multiplayer for, let's say, a 4-person competitive shooter, that is a completely different ordeal than creating it for 50,000, 100,000, or even probably even more than that player base. If we're talking about an MMO, and especially you have like multiple territories or multiple regions as well.
Yeah. I think generally speaking, the reason games get region locked is mostly to do with ping. So if you're got an American and someone from Europe playing on an EU server or an American server, one of you is going to have a bad time and if it's a Twitch shoot or something, a material disadvantage. What else? I'd have thought, and then it's gone. Something else I was going to talk about.
It's okay. That tends to happen on these guys. We get such a meaty conversation, we forget the next thing we're going to say.
Yeah. What was the start of your previous sentence? I had something I was going to say about it, and I can't think what it was.
About the amount of work that would go into, let's say, making like a 4-player game versus like 100,000, 200,000, or obviously more than that.
Yeah, because one thing you've got to consider when you're designing your server is how much information can you send reasonably. If you've got 10,000 players, you probably can't tell everybody about everybody else. But also, how much information should you send? So if you're playing a 4-player co-op game, like something like that, it's perfectly fine for all of the clients to know everything about what all the other players are doing. Whereas if it's a competitive game, you probably don't want actually for a client in one corner of the map to know where a player on the other corner of the map actually is, because they shouldn't know that. But if you send that information to the client, then someone with some kind of hack will know where their opponent is, and that enables cheating. So you also need to work out not only, possibly I can't send all this information, but also what information do I need to withhold deliberately in order to deal with cheating. There's one key concept is that a multiplayer server that works in the sense that it doesn't have any bugs in it and it sort of communicates everything about the game may not be enough. That may not be a sufficient solution. You need to be robust in the face of players trying to do weird stuff, either deliberately because they're trying to cheat or because players just do weird stuff sometimes. And so, this is the classic scenario of the game works fine in the office and we throw it out into the world and it all falls over. And also, actually, you need to worry about how your design scales as well. So if you imagine, people in a whacking great queue to use a laptop in the Division on launch day, because there's only one laptop and only one person can use it at once. Every time a QA tester went through that, it worked absolutely fine. But once you get, launch day numbers in, suddenly you realise, there's a big problem here. We haven't got enough laptops. So you've also got to think about your design scale as well, which is that's a different topic. It's not really my specialisation, but it's another consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I guess as another novice question for you, Chris, when you talk about kind of building your server or getting a server, I think I may have spoken to a few people about this when we were trying to set up things for our own multiplayer nights and such. I guess here's a very stupid question, I'm sure. Are all servers created equal from a hardware point of view, or is this a case when you go out to, say, look for a server, different places offer, kind of like when we talk about computers, different computers have different hardware specs, what they're meant for, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so you're talking about the physical servers. Yeah. So, it depends on your needs. So it's going to depend partly on just how well have you actually managed to multi-thread your server. If you buy a 64 core server, can you actually use them all? So things like so the servers for RuneScape need very little in terms of local storage. There's not much you actually need to store on a hard drive on that server, because all of the save game data comes from somewhere else and that kind of thing. So you've got machines that are full of RAM, full of CPUs, but not much else. And of course, they don't need any, graphics cards or anything. We're not doing any weird CUDA stuff to try and run RuneScape. It generally you're going to want a lot of grunt in the CPU and RAM department. But your other needs sort of may vary, but you're probably not going to need all that much hard drive space. Although I suppose if you had, some very large maps or something, maybe you need to. But in general, it's all about the the raw performance rather than storage.
Okay. And one of the things that I've seen like some developers tend to struggle with, I think, what you said earlier about like location or region
Mm.
base. So like for obviously for like a major studio, or if you're working on like a full big budget title,
Mm.
you're probably like, do you need like a group of servers per region? Is that kind of like how things are set up?
Yeah, so I think I can talk about this. So Jagex have five front end data centers. So there's one in London, one in Germany, and there's three in the States. There's East Coast, West Coast, and there's Miami, which is actually there for the benefit of South America. And we've got a co-hosting facility, which is where all of the back end stuff sits, and that's in the UK as well. And so that means that hopefully you have a data center relatively nearby.
Mm-hmm.
And also, there's this cunning thing that I didn't know about until I was talking to the ops guys. But you can actually advertise the same IP address in different places. So if you want to connect to the IP address for RuneScape World 1, which is in it's one coast of the US, I forget which, we actually advertise that IP address in all 5 data centers. And then so if you're playing in the UK and you want to connect to World 1, you actually connect to the UK data center, and then we have a dedicated connection to kind of pass you over to the States as quickly as possible, to actually minimize your ping, because we control that traffic on a dedicated line. And so we can sort of get you to the open internet hop is only between you and our server in London, and then on a dedicated line. So that's a very sophisticated setup, which is useful for various reasons. But yeah, I mean, it depends again also what kind of game you're making. If you're making some sort of turn-based game, then actually you're probably pretty resistant to lag and to ping. It probably doesn't matter that much. I mean, Chronicle, you could have played on a 2-second ping and not even noticed, because it's it wasn't even turn-based in the normal sense. It was you could play up to 4 cards, your opponent could play up to 4 cards, and you both lock your turns in, and then the server would alternate resolving those cards one after the other.
Yeah.
So it really was very lag tolerant. So unlike say Hearthstone, which has US servers and EU servers, we didn't bother with that. There was no need. Yeah, so it's how important sort of being located near your players is going to be is very much going to depend on the style of your game. And if you can't afford a big international setup, then maybe that's amongst other things a reason to consider. I mean, if you're a small setup, you got to make sure you're not going to drown in your own ambition anyway. I mean, I've set up as an indie, and I've got 12 years experience making multiplayer games. My indie game is not a multiplayer game. I've looked at that and gone, no, that's just too much work for me by myself. I'm not going to go there. I'm making a puzzle game because that's a nice tight scope. Yeah. So, but I guess you do need to consider kind of what your hardware costs are going to be, and what kind of game you can afford to run in a way that is going to meet the needs of the players in terms of how nice does it feel to play. With whatever latency they've got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't want to ask you about like from an indie standpoint about multiplayer in a few minutes. Now, one thing that I was thinking about a few minutes ago, you mentioned, of course, netcode and kind of like setting things up along those lines. And one thing that I hear, or one thing that I kind of see like people complain about when it comes to multiplayer, is that idea, or is not quite understand that there's a difference between you having a solid internet connection versus kind of the server that you're connecting to. I did a few years working at Comcast. It was like 10 years ago, doing like their internet support. And one of the things that I learned from like doing like working with them and learning things on that end is that if I have a 400 meg download connection, but if a server can only support, let's say, a 30 meg download in terms of someone connecting to it, then that means that my speed will never go higher than that. Is that kind of correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's like what's the thinnest bit of the pipe, I guess, is the analogy, right?
Yeah. And one of the like more interesting aspects behind this, you said it really has to do with kind of the game that you're trying to build. Like the multiplayer example about how much information do you send to the client. I think that's a very fascinating point about this. And Thorn asked in chat, how worried are you about like security and anti-cheat, I guess, from like a server standpoint of like RuneScape, games like that?
Yeah, I mean the ability to cheat kind of come unless you've got some sort of real deep hack where you're sending weird packets and making the server do weird stuff. Really, it comes down to how much does the server trust what the client is telling it. And the ideal scenario is really where the server is suspicious about everything. But there are trade-offs with that. And I think something like an FPS, I've got to be able to start walking forward as soon as I press W. I can't wait for the server to give me permission to start moving. And so to a certain extent, the server has to kind of accept on trust that the client is where it's saying it is. And even when that's working perfectly fine, you still have problems where people sort of glitch through walls because they seem to move too far in an update and the server gets confused and suddenly you're somewhere you shouldn't be. Actually, RuneScape is a good example of a game that doesn't trust the client with pretty much anything. So when you click on the floor to walk somewhere, all that does is send a message to the server saying the player would like to walk here. If that's okay, please work that out. And the server then works out if there is a route and if that's fine. And then it doesn't even send the route back to the client. It just says to the client, right, I need you to walk one square north. And then I need you to walk a square north. And it does it. So RuneScape is actually a tick-based game. So every 600 milliseconds, another tick is processed. You might walk a square where you run 2 squares. The downside to that is that if I click to walk somewhere, the amount of time I might have to wait to start moving is 600 milliseconds plus whatever my ping is to the server and back. And so, and that was fine in 2001 when everybody still played with modems and RuneScape was new and this all made sense. But we do know from playtesting that, new players will often kind of bounce off RuneScape a bit because it seems a bit clunky. And you sort of click somewhere to do something and nothing happens and you click a few more times and then eventually you start moving and it seems laggy, but actually it's just how RuneScape was coded in a way that made perfect sense, whatever it is, like 19 years ago. So, yeah, but I mean, even a lot of the interfaces in the game in RuneScape actually run on the server, which is a weird way of doing things, and it has its downsides again. If you click a button to open up a different interface, nothing happens until the message has got to the server. It's processed the next 100 millisecond tick, and then the message has come back. So it's not particularly responsive. So, but it's very hard to cheat in the normal sense. What you can do is you can automate stuff. So I can submit a suspiciously large number of clicks in one tick if I've got a little tool doing it for me. And you obviously, people bot RuneScape because they want to get in-game cash and they want to real-world trade it. That's an ongoing problem. That's the big problem. The ongoing problem that RuneScape faces is bots, because people want to gold farm and then sell that cash on, which it affects the economy. It affects other players who see huge numbers of mining bots if we don't keep up on it. The accounts doing this sometimes are associated with credit card fraud, which is just bad all around. And so we've got a big analytics setup, a bunch of data scientists who are paid a large amount of money to help detect this stuff with lots of automated things. Which again, that is a big company solution. That's not something that an indie setup can afford, I suspect, because you're going to pay an awful lot of people to do their very specialized things.
Yeah, and protecting a game like that, I think that's a topic in of itself. Because I've spoken to people like Second Life's developers about setting up their whole system. I'm sure there's so many horror stories about that. And to your comment, Rat's Tail in chat, I will ask that in a second. But staying on this idea of cheating and protecting your game from that, one of the things that I remember when I played the online game Payday or Payday 2 was that a lot of people kind of broke that game. And I remember someone was saying that they store a lot of information on the client side. And as you said, wherever the client gets access to, or what's on, stored on the client's computer, kind of is, to somebody who knows what they're doing, is pretty much kind of free reign to mess with that code. You can say, give money $10 billion. And I guess, again, this may be too big of a question. Maybe it could be its own topic of itself. But what does that exactly mean for the server? If I'm on my own computer and I go into the code or wherever, I say, I'm really level 10,000 and I have $40 million, and then I go online and I send my information to the server, does I'm not sure how I frame this from a novice point of view, but how does the server not figure out that, hey, this guy had $5 when he logged in yesterday, he now has $40 million and now is at max level?
Yeah. The interesting thing about Payday is that it's a co-op game, right? So in a sense, it's less important because it's not a competitive game. And if you and a couple of friends want to cheat, well, you're not
Yeah.
ruining anyone else's day. You know what I mean? So actually, your approach to that, so making a co-op multiplayer game, is in that sense is less of a tricky task, because that there are certain classes of problem but you don't really care about, because if players want to mess around on as a group, sure, why not? In terms of kind of the phrase we probably use in industry would be an authoritative server. So is the server really in charge of where's the state, where's the source of truth? That's what you're coming from, right? So if I say to the server, hey, I've got $10 million, how does the server know? So really, you need to design your system so that the server knows how much you have, and it is in control of anything that changes that amount. So if I want to buy a weapon, that goes via the server. The server updates its record of how much money I have, and it tells the client what the number is. And the client, you could hack your client to display any number on the screen you wanted, but that's not going to convince the server that it's changed, because the server isn't taking its cue on how much money you have from what the client's doing. It's taking it from its own internal logic. So the simulation, the game that's running itself, tells it how much money you have, and really the client just displays that information to the user. So I mean, one interesting question to ask yourself when you're designing a server is how much code can you share between the client and the server, because if you're running, if doing this thing costs $200 in game or whatever, to a certain extent, if you know that on the client, so the server does it, updates your sort of authoritative bank balance and so on. If the client knows how to do that as well, then when you click the button, it can on the spot deduct your balance without having to wait for the client, the ping for the server to say, oh, you spent $200. So you can improve client performance by leaving all the authority of what is really true on the server, but you can allow the client to run through the same calculation so that it can give quick updates to the player. And assuming the player isn't doing anything weird and they haven't hacked their client, everything just works. If they are messing around, well, they're welcome to do that, but they can't affect the server. They can only, they can hack a lovely screenshot of how rich they are, but it doesn't affect the game itself.
Yeah. And what you said there about it's a cooperative game, that was one of the things a lot of people have cited as why it was it should have been kept, or I think it was kept fairly legal to have custom mods, things along those lines. And that kind of philosophy, I think that's a topic, that's another topic in of itself. But a few questions came in since we started. So Rat's Tail asked, they are an indie, plan on making a Hearthstone-like game, potentially with the Mirror Library. Any advice you can offer?
Okay, so the Mirror Library I'm not familiar with. I can't give you any advice on that, I'm afraid. But having made a CCG, I imagine what you're doing would be reasonably similar. We took the decision early on we were going to make the client in Unity. That means we were going to write in C#. Therefore, we wrote the server in C# in order to share the code for exactly the reasons I was talking about. The client can sort of play out what's going to happen when you play a card straight away without sort of waiting for the server to give it permission, because unless you're hacking your client, they're going to do the same thing, and that's okay, and you get a responsive kind of feel. You'll often hear people say sort of networking for online games don't use TCP/IP. I could go into the reasons why. It would be a slightly lengthy discussion, but actually for something like a card game where actually you are very lag tolerant, you can, because the reasons for doing that in FPSs are to do with drop packets and holding up the message queue and that kind of thing. The other thing is that one important question in any game is what are we saving? And so you may find that you may have already kind of spotted this, but you need to save your player's profile. But at no point do we need to save the state of an in-progress game. If your server crashes, which hopefully is going to be a rare event, the odds of getting those two people reconnecting at the right time to sort of resume their game somehow, it's not worth worrying about. Especially if it's a short-form game, if it's a 5-minute match, doesn't matter. So don't worry about persisting data that is transient. Just make sure that your players' actual profiles and their what cards they own and their win-loss rates and that kind of thing. Make sure that's absolutely rock solid. But an individual game is ephemeral, and we don't really care if it disappears.
Okay. And I do want to ask you in a minute or so about kind of like the different ways players can connect to each other. as well, because I've seen some of that and I've had to do some of that myself in the past. But Mr. Ilrude asks in chat, I guess how, or it could be what good server do you actually need to process all those things like inventory and moving on server?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on the scale of the game. So, RuneScape, we run several worlds on a single physical machine. And when they have enough RAM to do that, they've got enough CPUs, enough cores. So I mean, it's going to go down to benchmarking. So Chronicle, because it was you were sort of planning your turn, sending a message to the server saying, I'm putting this card here and I'm putting this card here, and I've changed my mind about that one, and you sort of press go and commit your turn, and your opponent would do the same. In that phase, a game in progress takes basically no processing power. When a message comes in, the server goes, oh, hang on, this message is for this game, do a bit of processing, go back to sleep. And then when both turns are submitted, it says, right, I'm going to process this turn, send the results out, but then it can go back to sleep again. And so you could have thousands of games running in parallel on a single process. I mean, we only had one process on the server, but because it sort of scaled pretty well sideways on a given process. And so you could have any number of instances of a game running in one process because of the nature of the game it was. So it's going to involve benchmarking and seeing seeing what your bottleneck is. Is it memory? Is it cores? You're going to have to then sort of spec out a server that's appropriate to whatever it is that you've come up with.
Okay. And then another question from him. He said, what happens when the server does not trust the client? Because what about a situation when the client sends, hey, I clicked buying 100 health potions while the client avatar is really like in the middle of a raid somewhere? Yeah,
so I mean, the server at some level kind of obviously understands the game because it's running it, and so it needs to have an idea of, well, what is a valid thing I can do at this point, and so again, this is all sort of be very bespoke depending on exactly what your game is, but depending on where the players are in the game and what they are, that should be limiting their ability to do stuff. And so basically the server needs to sanity check everything that comes in from the client and say, does this actually make sense? Because not only it's saying I'm buying 100 HP potions in the middle of a raid, like, do you have a backpack limit of 20, like, or something? It's going to have to say for some reason, well, you just can't do that. I don't care how often you click the button, you just can't do it. So it's again, it's the thing applying all the limitations and being the arbiter of what's permissible and what isn't. So your server is the thing that's granting permission all the time. So basically, if because you might naively write a game where the only thing the server checks when you click the buy potion button is, do I have enough cash? And if it's only checking that and hasn't gone, hang on a minute, you're not even in the shop, then that's an issue. And that's what I was saying about your code may not be, your game may not be sufficient. The amount of code you have may not be enough to deal with players messing about. So it'll work perfectly when everyone's well behaved, but you need to deal with the contingent of, well, hang on, if some player sends me a weird message at a weird time, is the server just going to blindly accept it because it looks reasonable on one level, or is it going to say, well, hang on, no, this is not the appropriate time to be sending this message? So that's where the naive implementation comes back to bite you.
And like with that kind of example, that, as you said, that's more on the coding or the programming on the game side. That is less, the server being like the culprit then, right?
Yeah, so it's I mean, it's depending on how your thing is set up. So in RuneScape, that would be a scripting thing rather than an engine thing. So I work on the actual source code of the engine itself. We've got a whole team of content devs who make the quests and design the items and that kind of thing. So that would be the ball would be in their court for that. So exactly sort of whose responsibility is going to depend on your setup, but it's not going to be that's not going to be an engine consideration. That's going to be a game logic consideration.
And I guess that takes me to, another question I want to ask you. Like, as you said, you've been working with RuneScape and Jagex. You said, what was that, 12, 13 years?
12 years, yeah.
12 years. And I wanted to ask, this is something that I have very little experience whatsoever, but I guess, how much have things changed, like either from a methodology or a hardware standpoint, that you can kind of like talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned briefly that kind of RuneScape's roots were kind of in the modem era, um, and so I think the original version of RuneScape was designed to perform okay after the initial download of the content. Once you were in game, it would cope with a baud rate of 600 bytes a second, because that was kind of a reasonable baseline. And so RuneScape has always actually been very well pared down in terms of how much data we send, and that was a big focus of its development. Um, you know, and so it's always been a very frugal game with its data. And so these days that's not so important in some ways. Networks are faster and so on. We're more worried about the storage problem of like how many hard drives do we need to store all these player saves. We've got how many? We passed 250 million accounts a while ago, so it's a lot of data you've got to store. But also you do want to say, well, when you log into a server in Miami, the Miami server has to retrieve your save game from the UK data center and send it over, and we've got to send it to you. So you do want to keep it small anyway, just to keep logins quick. But yeah, the fact that network latency has gone down and bandwidth has gone up so much means that RuneScape sort of looks surprisingly paranoid in its data use, I guess. Although it did come back to being very useful when we then put RuneScape onto mobile. So there's two versions of RuneScape. There's RuneScape and Old School RuneScape. Old School RuneScape Mobile is already out. RuneScape Mobile is coming, or it's in beta. And of course, then you've got people on metered connections on their cellular data. And so there you want to be very careful with people's bandwidth. And so suddenly it then became again relevant that we'd actually done all this work to keep the data small over the years. So I guess that's one thing that's changed. One interesting thing about the way RuneScape was put together graphically, and this is to do with the fact that it was trying to run entirely on the CPU in Java, which wasn't very fast in 2001. The JVM wasn't very advanced, and it was trying to run as a Java applet in a browser, and it was trying to build a 3D world entirely in CPU. The old models for RuneScape, all the detail is done in geometry, not in textures. There are almost no textures in the very oldest versions of RuneScape, because drawing lots of differently colored triangles turned out actually to be faster in Java on a CPU in 2001. And obviously the version of RuneScape we have now, now we've got a full-on native C++ client. I mean, you can't do Java applets in a browser anymore anyway, but we did do a downloadable Java client. We bundled the OpenJDK with a bootstrapper that then downloaded the client and ran it. But now we've got, huge numbers of models, particles, real-time lighting, all kinds of stuff all happening on the graphics card. But yeah, it's kind of crazy to think that, there was once a time when RuneScape used lots of triangles because that was faster. And that was, the original version of RuneScape, which is now what we call RuneScape Classic, didn't even have, the world was 3D, but all of the NPCs and players were 2D sprites. But then in 2004, RuneScape 2 came out with a fully 3D world, but then, still lots of triangles. Let's not use textures. Textures are slow, it turns out. Which, it's crazy when you think back at it 15 years later.
And again, like I grew up, my first multiplayer games that was a dial-up modem connection. So I think data was being sent like 56 kilobytes.
That was on a good day.
Oh yeah, that was a very good day. Nobody used your phone and caused it to disconnect. And again, any kid watching this right now is just wondering how the hell did we live back then? The 90s that felt like 80 years ago at this point.
Yeah, when you had to start your PC with a crankshaft in the morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, make sure there was enough coal in the oven to get it to work.
Yeah, that's the one.
Let's see. Miss Olrude asked, with processes line of thought, can Chris talk how development processes like Agile, Waterfall, etc. have changed in the last 10 years?
Yeah. Agile is one of those things that lots of companies say they do, and what they really mean is they use Jira, which is an issue tracker. We've got a lot better at it. We've hired product owners and producers who kind of have done this before and know what they're doing. So, when I first started at Jagex, when they said how long will it take, you kind of stuck your finger in the air and said 6 weeks. Whereas now we have a process where we break everything down, we plan it, we say relative size of the tasks and so on, and we can deliver on assuming nothing breaks down. The problem with us estimating, we can estimate how much work there is, but when we'll deliver it depends on how many fires do we have to put out in the live environment this week. that sort of take us out for half a day or a day. So yes, I mean it's changed a lot. We've got a lot better at it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we do use Jira, but yeah, we do sprint. Well, in fact, the RuneScape engine team doesn't use sprints. We use Kanban because we're supporting a live project. Trying to say, oh, in the next 2 weeks we're going to deliver this doesn't really work. We're just trying to get stuff across the board as quickly as possible from sort of to do to done. So that and then at some point we'll then say, well, we'll look at all the issues we've finished and we'll cut a new release from those, possibly to support some better content that's going out in a couple of weeks' time. So they need a new engine for it. So it's done that way, but that makes more sense for supporting a live product than trying to do sprints and stuff.
Okay. Now, one question that I have, like when you're setting up a new server, let's say you buy a server or you get coming to host your game on your server, like is there like a standard time it takes to get that server configured for your game, or does it depend on the client and the game itself?
Excuse me. So I mean, for RuneScape, we've got this down to a highly automated process. There's our sysadmins have all kinds of awesome stuff. There's a system called Puppet that basically you can just say, make this server like that one, and it just sort of does it. And so they can provision a new server extremely quickly, and that's it means they're all exactly the same as well. That's the real advantage, is you don't end up running an update and forgetting the one server stuck in a corner that no one knows about, and suddenly it's doing things different to everything else. Everything's sort of centrally administered. And so that is, you want to automate stuff as much as is sensible. You need to have enough points you can go in and make sure everything's worked, but you want it to be slick because there's just less to forget about then. And so, yeah, how long it takes us is almost no time at all, but that's because we've done a lot of work up front to make it an automated process.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Rat's Tail asked, how would you handle... Oh wait. First part. How would you handle the server hardware, like for a CCG? Would you use Amazon AWS, or would you rent a simple Linux box and run it there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's going to depend on. I guess one thing that something like a cloud service, the advantage is that you can scale pretty much instantly without you having to do much, and you just have to pay Amazon for whatever server costs you're putting up. So if you don't know how many servers to buy, a cloud-based system where you can kind of rent more, at least in the short term, until you work out where you are, and then maybe it's worth getting a dedicated server or some dedicated servers. I mean, even big game studios, they'll have a certain amount of capacity they've provisioned, but they'll also have something on Amazon basically for burst capacity. So if you might get a massive spike on launch day of activity, but if you buy enough servers to meet that demand, then in a month you might only be using half of them. So it might be worth you getting a load of them, getting Amazon to provide you with the burst capacity then. So even big companies are doing that. So I mean, it may be worth having one rented server just to play around with and test stuff on, which you're then not paying Amazon for data and stuff. Depends on what the economics of that would be, because it could be a very basic one if it's just for your testing initially. But yeah, the advantage of AWS is that it scales really well if you don't know how big it's going to go. You do have to watch. You don't end up with some runaway costs. If someone, you occasionally get, this probably isn't strictly game related, you hear the occasional horror story of someone who gets a crypto miner kind of embedded in their AWS service somewhere by somebody malicious, and they're suddenly using lots of CPU time and their bill goes through the roof. So you need to be aware of what the costs are, with AWS, depending on how much it scales. But it can be a wise decision if there are lots of unknowns.
Let's see. They follow up with this. How would you handle car-specific code? Would you code the keywords in the rules engine? Would you use LUA scripts for bespoke code, or simple C#, which is not simple for me to say?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Lua scripting is pretty common. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, I wouldn't end up actually sort of hard coding any card abilities or card stats baking into your C++ code. You want some kind of config-driven system where there's a big file with all the cards and some stats and something understands what they do. So you can change those just by changing a config file and not have to rebuild the entire game. But then whether the engine that understands what those rules do is written in C# or is written in Lua, I mean, that's going to be a for Chronicle, we just did it all in C#. We didn't have any kind of scripting like that. But then again, we had a relatively small team, and so we didn't have a big load of content devs who didn't know C# and didn't really want to. It was okay for everyone to sort of muck in on that end of things. The designers were just making spreadsheets and stuff, but people implementing it were all comfortable in code. So it might depend who's going to do that. And one consideration, of course, is that if people are coding card behavior in C# and they've got therefore direct access to anything that's kind of public in that code base, you can potentially do some really weird stuff if you're not careful. You might accidentally quit the game if you call the wrong method. It'd be pretty daft, but theoretically it's possible, right? Whereas if you're in a scripting engine, you are slightly isolated from everything else. So that makes things safer, just from accidental screw up. So yeah, depending on if you're on your own, if you're a solo dev, then that risk is pretty minimal because you're going to know all the code. If you're on a big team, then getting the content developers to, or whatever you might call that role, to do it in a scripting language might be sensible, just because you can then guarantee a certain amount of safety around what the cards can do code-wise.
Okay. And now, one thing that I wanted to elaborate on about, as we said, about like when you're scaling up, when you have to account for more players, and this is something that, as any consumer of a multiplayer-based game has ran into, is the day one. We assume only 30,000 people are going to play our game, and suddenly we find there's 1.2 million, and issues along those lines. Because this is something that I think, again, like for the consumer, they just see it as, damn that stupid developer, why didn't they plan for an extra 700,000 people? But what's it like from like your side, from the back end, when all of a sudden you see that there's 100 times more people than you expected on your servers now?
Yeah, I mean, so one aspect I said, with Amazon you can scale it really fast, is that there are probably going to be some systems that you've only got one copy of. So if there's where the player saves are coming to and from, now you might have your players sort of segregated, so there's a bunch of different login servers for RuneScape, and depending on who you are, you're on a different one. But if there's a sort of a one master database that has the information about your play state on it, if you've got 10 times as many players, you can have 10 times as many front-end servers, but that back-end data retrieval system might still get backed up, and it's not easy to scale that sideways because you've got your one source of truth, which is this database or whatever it might be. So you might need to, if you have a sort of way of splitting that data up, you might need to do that. Because if you haven't done that because you don't think you'll need it, so you've only got one profile server, then that's going to be very difficult to scale that up suddenly. If you made a system that can cope with clustering and you didn't think you'd even need, but you made 2, and now it turns out you need 10, that might be much more achievable. So there's a kind of you need to consider what doesn't scale well and what you can do to mitigate that. And again, that's usually going to be your back end stuff. Jagex has its own billing system, which then talks to the various payment providers and stuff. And if we suddenly got 100 million players turn up and want to buy something all at the same time, that would struggle. And that's not easy to scale because it's it's the authority on exactly what players have bought and what haven't. So that's one aspect of it you need to consider. So some things scale easier than others, basically. What else? There was something else I was going to say, I think. About this problem. Oh yes, just the other thing. The other reason to be able to scale sideways, if you're talking about should I rent a server or have an AWS thing, is that as soon as you only got one server, if that server crashes, your game's offline. And so it's worth having a little bit of redundancy, just for the some muppet at the data center tripped over a power cable scenario. Or the more likely scenario, actually, is occasionally you get situations where some bloke with a digger outside accidentally just dug through all our data cables and now it's offline. That happened to the Jagex office. Was it early this year? It must have been late last year, I think. So they were doing renovation works on a building next door, and somebody chopped through some optic fiber, and so the office internet was briefly out. So that's the kind of thing you need to worry about as well. So you want to minimize your single points of failure. And in some cases, you'll have one for good reason, like it's the database of player saves. But although it should at least be backed up. So that's the thing to watch is how. And so in fact, when we went with when we did Chronicle, we talked very early on to our infrastructure guys about what's the best way to set up the physical servers for Chronicle to work well with the existing data center setup we have for RuneScape. And they said, well, it's actually easier for us if you're in every data center, because that means every data center is the same for Chronicle. And you should have 2 machines in every data center, so that if one of them goes down, that data center still can support people trying to play Chronicle. And so that was the kind of conversation we had with them about how to set that up.
Yeah. I remember reading interviews and stories from Blizzard with kind of how their server setup is kind of like a war room of massive multiple servers set up, as you said, having redundancy, and you don't want if you're making an online game somebody trips and hits the wrong button or flips a switch and your entire game goes offline like that.
And I guess you've got the somebody might say, well, having this all this redundancy is kind of expensive, and the response then is, well, how expensive is it if the game goes offline and we haven't got a backup? That we're then players are then doing something else, they're not coming back, and maybe so it's one of those things that seems expensive, but you do need it.
Oh yes. And Igor asked in chat, speaking of backend, does Chris have any recommendations of databases for use in gaming?
So that's very much going to depend on what your data looks like. So people often think database, they think MySQL or Postgres or something, or some kind of relational database. But actually, if your player data is just a blob of data per player, and you never really have to do kind of indexed lookups, between different players, then actually a NoSQL database like CouchDB or something might be the thing for you. Because if you're just going to say, give me this player's data, or this player's data, or this player's data, and you're not interested in, find me all players with more than 300 hours playtime who registered on a Tuesday or something, which is the kind of thing that relational databases are very good at. So how you're going to access your data is going to affect which of those two you go with. I wouldn't recommend doing what RuneScape did in 2001, which is not using a database at all and having its own custom file structure. It's probably not a good idea. It's a lot of effort. So what's the nature of your data, I think, is the first question, and then depending on how you're going to access it, go either SQL or NoSQL.
Okay.
So CouchDB is one I've used. That's what we use for Chronicle, so I can recommend that. I think Fortnite used Mongo. I think they did a blog post ages ago about how they structure their data, and MongoDB was mentioned somewhere, but I can't remember for what. But that's another popular one. Although when I was talking to ROT guys about a NoSQL database for Chronicle, they said, don't use Mongo, we hate Mongo, it's really hard to set up for some. I don't know why. I didn't ask. I just said, okay, fine, we're not that fussed. Couch will work, we'll go with that. But it made them happy, so we did it.
Let's see, another question just came in. Any thoughts on a GraphDB?
So GraphDB is not something I've ever used. Actually, no, that's not true. That is not true. The Friends system for Chronicle was a graph database. It was, what was it called? Neo4j, that was it. So you then have a bunch of nodes and you make connections between them. And so the connection might be, friendship requested or actually friends or ignored or whatever. And that was a good way to maintain that list, because you could sort of go to a particular node, a particular person, and say, find me all the connections for that person. And you could then get a friends list and an ignore list very quickly. So for that kind of thing, yes, that would work well. We worked with that, and it was a good system.
Okay. And one thing that I wanted to ask about, this goes back to something that we were discussing earlier about the netcode of a game. And again, this is something I have very little experience about. When you say about designing the netcode, I guess, what does that entail? What does that affect when it comes to playing a multiplayer game?
So I mentioned one thing before, which was about using TCP/IP. So the way that works is, if you're sending messages and you're sending message 16, message 17, message 18, if message 17 goes missing because you get 16 and then you get 18, it'll say, hang on a minute, I need 17, and it will stop sending any information back up to the application, and it will stop sending any data until message number set. So it'll then say back to the other end, we missed 17, please send it. It'll get sent again. Then it'll go, right, I've got 17 and 18, 19, 20, and whatever. And it'll then pass a whole load of data all in one go. Now, the thing is, if the information you missed is where a player was standing, and they got a 200 millisecond ping, so it took 100 milliseconds for that to reach you, then you realized it was missing, 100 milliseconds to go back, and 100 milliseconds again. What you've now just retrieved is the information about where the player was 300 milliseconds ago. And frankly, you don't really care anymore. You want to know where they are now, and it's not worth holding up the network queue to retrieve that information. What's much better is to say, well, you know what, if I miss an update about where the player is, like we knew where they were then, this update's gone missing, but we've got this one, and we'll just fill in the gaps. That we can cope with that. It's all right. Well, it's fine. And so not every positional update has to get through. But then there are some information that needs to get through. If I pull the trigger, I don't really want that to go missing, because that's kind of awkward. If the player's lined up the perfect headshot on their screen, they push the button and nothing happens, or it happens on their client, but then the player doesn't die because they didn't actually shoot, as far as the server's concerned, that's awkward. And so you've got sort of two tiers of information: stuff that has to get through and stuff that doesn't. So you need to treat those two things differently. And so the system that often gets used is UDP, which is an alternative to TCP/IP, where stuff isn't guaranteed to arrive. And so then developers build what they call reliable UDP. And reliable UDP is a term that makes like network engineers tear their hair out, because they say that's what TCP's for. But then you explain to them it's about the packet loss latency thing that you don't want, and they kind of go, oh, okay, fair enough. And so you can say, if I send a message out, I'm going to remember I sent it. And until I get an acknowledgement from the other end that they received it, I'm going to keep sending it over and over again, just in case. And you can do that for stuff like, I pulled the trigger, because that's got to get through. Whereas for positional updates, you kind of send them once. If they don't get through, well, never mind. So that's the kind of decision you've got to take, is what information has to get through, and how you're going to make sure it does. And actually, even if you're doing TCP/IP networking, like if your network connection drops, the Wi-Fi goes weird on the client end or whatever, and you've got to establish a new connection, like any messages that were kind of in flight, they're still not going to get there. TCP/IP reliable delivery doesn't mean that a new connection magically knows what the old connection did. So you've got to somehow store them on your end to send them again later anyway. So there's a whole load of, this is one of the ways in which multiplayer is more difficult, just because the world isn't a particularly clean and nice place, and stuff goes missing and stuff goes wrong. So doing all of that in a timely manner, and then you've got to deal with, players are sending messages at different amounts of ping, but you don't want, if two players face each other and pull the trigger exactly at the same time, and the bullets kind of cross in midair, and they both kill each other, and one player's got really low ping, and they've sort of killed the other player before their "I pulled the trigger" message gets through to the server, they still need to be able to kill the other player. So you've then got to deal with ordering packets as they come in from different players, and kind of building up an idea of sort of shuffling things into the right order in terms of when they really happened. And then that's a tricky thing, because you've then got to have some way of sort of timestamping a message and working out how far behind the player is and that kind of thing. So there's a whole load of nastiness to deal with that as well. Otherwise, people with low ping don't just have the advantage of having low ping, but they have the advantage of, other people's messages might get excluded if they appear invalid by the time they get there. Yeah, so there's a whole load of, many things.
And again, like you've been saying, like the nightmare all is that this is happening in milliseconds. Like you need to be able to set this up to be incredibly fast. And something that I think we see, like the fighting game genre in particular, I think has been one that has been very interesting in terms of this kind of netcode, because I follow or I've like watched people who play professional fighting games, and the fighting game community has they do their best to avoid servers and netcode at any time. Like the whole point of Evo is that it is a local tournament. You have to be in the place. And there was all this talk earlier this year about if they're doing an online version of Evo, how much horrible it's going to be for the competitors, because a lot of fighting-based games aren't really known for having solid netcode. And as you said, like it can be an issue of, I punch first, but the server, gives it to the other guy, and suddenly now I'm getting completely dominated because of, a server inconsistency or lag.
Yeah. I mean, also in stuff like FPSs, how quickly you can react to stuff because you see it happening is important. But, the reactions are even tighter in a fighting game, and not just reaction time, but timing of things is so important as well. Because the other aspect of thing that often gets rolled into is the netcode good, is how quickly can the server turn the message around. So it receives your input, how quickly can it then send messages out to anybody who needs to about what just happened. That's part of the round trip time, is the processing on the other end. yeah, and so you just, and also, yeah, I mean, they're just so latency sensitive. Yeah, I mean, I don't play a lot of fighting games, but I can totally see why you would want the absolute minimum delay. I mean, is that the kind of thing where people don't want to use wireless controllers as well? Do people talk about that in fighting games? You know, because of the extra delay in that stuff. Has that come up?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I don't know whether fighting games people tend to not use wireless controllers because of the extra delay in just in
Yeah.
that bit. Yeah, so it's so tight. Yeah, and so anything involving a server and variable amounts of lag is just going to be a nightmare. So yeah, I totally get why you would want to have a local tournament. It is going to be very tight to do it, tricky to do it. Because partly because so much of it is out of your control. You know exactly what the client code does. You know exactly what the server code does. What the internet in between is doing is anybody's guess. So that's not even inside your control. And so if you have a very tight requirement, then it all goes out the window as soon as the open internet's involved.
Now, I guess a few questions in chat, but there's one that I've been curious about. I'm not sure this will be something you can speak to, but one of the big things that kind of happened over the last decade with kind of the rise of digital distribution platforms, Steam, Uplay, etc., have been having single player games being forced to connect to an online server, either for some kind of quasi multiplayer system, for online protection, whatever. From kind of like the back end point of view, I guess how much data is really necessary for, like, if you're playing a single player game that requires an online connectivity?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it depends. I mean, stuff like Diablo 3, Path of Exile and stuff. I mean, even if you're playing single player, you're still playing on a multiplayer server. It's just only you're there, so the whole thing is still being done. Which one of the things that put me off Diablo 3 was that I'm playing single player, and whether or not I die might depend on how good the internet connection is. If I suddenly my Wi-Fi drops, then I might get splattered by a boss. It's kind of annoying. Yeah, so I mean, really, it's going to depend on. I mean, sometimes it really is just a DRM feature, if you want to put feature in inverted commas. And that's literally what it's doing. And it might even just be, getting some checksums. It might send some challenges to the client to make sure it can answer them properly to try and detect a cracked version of the game or something. And it might just be that. It's really depend on the implementation. So I think was it one of the SimCity games that claimed it had to always be online, and then someone kind of fiddled it so it wasn't, and it worked absolutely fine. Yeah, which is never a good look. So I think a lot of it is DRM focused, and of course the other reason that Diablo didn't want you just playing a single player game is because they wanted you connected to the real money auction house when that was still around. So they had another incentive to sort of do it all online.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I guess actually any game involving microtransactions to a certain extent needs some sort of online component, right? So Path of Exile can't sell you loot stash tabs if you're offline. So I guess there's that aspect.
Let's see. Igor asked in chat, do you think the art of creating netcode is getting lost in times of Unity and UE4?
So, I mean, there is something to be said for leaving hard problems like netcode to someone who's more intelligent than you and has done it before. If you can get some really expert engineers in to sort of do a really good job as a built-in thing you can use. I mean, there's a benefit to that. There's a certain hubris that says I'll write it myself and it'll be fine. So there is wisdom there. I mean, as long as somebody's doing it, that's okay. And it's like, I mean, I took the decision I'm not going to write my own 3D engine to make my game because that would just take me a long time. If I ever did write a 3D engine, it wouldn't be because I thought I'm going to make an awesome one and it's going to be better than anything else. It would basically be as a learning experience. I think, the best way to understand how 3D engines work is to write one. Something I picked up in my at university was someone saying, if you want to really understand the wheel, you have to reinvent it. And there's a lot of truth in that, I think. But I think, it's not going to. There's always going to be a demand for it somewhere, so it's not going to disappear completely. Fewer people might sort of end up with a sort of a reasonable level of competency, but as long as they're experts, shipping the goods, I think we're okay.
Okay. And then to follow that up, Rat's Tail asked, how would you handle too few players playing your game?
I mean, from a server point of view, I mean, part of that's a marketing problem, but so if you're doing, you need to make sure for things like it's not taking matchmaking a long time to work. If you've got a very small game, then frankly, the matchmaking system of the first two people who want to play a match, so they play a match, is probably fine. Right? Don't overthink it. I've seen games which I've known about sort of how they've gone during their beta, because I've sort of had back channel information, and basically they had this really complicated matchmaking system worked out that was going to like deal with like player skill over time, all that kind of stuff. But because their beta was small, it was really hard to get a full game, because it would kind of put 7 out of 8 people over here and 7 out of 8 people over here, and they could have had 8 people playing a game, but they were in 2 different queues. So make sure that people are getting some kind of experience of your game without waiting too long. So they are getting, so their experience isn't primarily sitting in a lobby. That'd be my biggest advice, I think.
All right. And as a time check, we are just over an hour in. So I have a few more questions for you. I'm also going to throw it to you if there's anything you want to talk specifically about. I also want to kind of ask about your game that you're working on as well. For the chat watching us, if you have any other questions, we still have time open, so definitely feel free to leave them down below. But one thing that I was curious about, and from like kind of setting up the different, and I think this is more on the for independent developer side of things, that I see a lot of developers who, when they're trying to make their game, tend to struggle with what kind of multiplayer architecture they want to use. As we said, there's TCP/IP, there's a client host. You mentioned earlier, we even have stuff like a simultaneous turn-based. I think that's TCP/IP or a direct connection. And then there's, of course, getting a server. I guess for developers watching this, I know Ratsail's asked this a few times, like, when you're trying to decide what kind of multiplayer system you want to use, or multiplayer architecture specifically, I guess, what are some good questions you should be asking yourself, or that you should be looking into to kind of decide where you want to go?
Yeah, so the one big thing is, do I need an authoritative server? I'm more worried about players cheating and stuff. So one architecture we've not mentioned yet, which would work well for a co-op stuff, is a peer-to-peer system where one player effectively is the server.
Yeah.
I mean, they used to be really common in the old days, right? All the old RTSs and stuff used to do that. Somebody would be the master. And so, particularly with co-op stuff, where you're not so worried about people cheating and being abusive, that can be a great way to do it. There's then often a bit of work to get the 2 players directly connected, and depending on whether they're behind nets and firewalls, that can be awkward. But that's a surmountable problem. But at that point, of course, your server infrastructure costs are nil. Because the players just are running one of them's running a server and everybody else is talking to them. So that can be a good option, because of course the whole, how much am I paying for this back end? Am I doing Amazon and stuff? That's all taken care of using the player's own hardware for that. So that can be a good choice for certain things. And of course there's always local multiplayer, you get rid of the whole netcode thing completely, and I think a lot of indies do local multiplayer games, particularly for console stuff, because it is a much smaller problem to solve, and it's a much smaller game to make in terms of effort. So there's a real benefit to that. Because as well as also saying, here's the game, what kind of game I want to make, what kind of architecture do I need? There's also a question of, well, what kind of architecture can I afford to make in terms of manpower and server costs, and therefore should that affect the game I'm trying to produce? So you've got basically you've either got a server you're running. There's also the dedicated server, of course. I mean, you can make the server available to people, and they can host their own, and people can connect to that. You can do it that way, and that server might then still be authoritative as far as the clients are concerned. But obviously, whoever owns the server can then do all kinds of things to it, and also they can mod it and stuff as well. You support the modding community by having people host their own servers. That can be a benefit to your game. That can be a draw for people to play your game over someone else's. That's an option. I mean, look at Minecraft, for goodness sake.
Or like Team Fortress 2 back in the day too.
I mean. Because then once you got to like Battlefield 3, of course, you sort of had to get a officially hosted server, although you could install some stuff on it, but it slightly went out the window at that point for that kind of game.
Yep. Yeah. And speaking about like peer-to-peer, like that's one of the things I think, and Mr. Earl has a question about that I'll get to in a second. Like, I don't know if you heard of the game of Full Metal Furies that came out, I think I want to say 2, maybe 3 years ago. This was a co-op game by Celador Games, who, let me see, what was he? Oh yeah, they made Rogue Legacy. I always forget that they made Rogue Legacy. It came out in 2017. And one of the things that I remember about that game, and again, like kind of why this discussion is so important, is that it's a multiplayer-based game, But when they released it, there was no way to essentially. I'm trying to remember what was the thing. Oh yeah, the only way you could play multiplayer was by peer to peer. There was no servers whatsoever. There was no way to set up a random game that people join, and it kind of demolished that game for like the first, I think, 6 months to a year of its release for that very reason, because people didn't want to play a multiplayer game that they couldn't just set up, I want to just play with whoever's available. And another game that ran into this issue was the title GTFO. This is a multiplayer cooperative-based shooter that when it got into early access, the very first version of that game was literally, we have no servers. The only way for you to play is to connect with someone through our Discord. And the kind of the moral that I'm trying to get to is that as a developer, you do need to be very mindful of what your multiplayer architecture is going to be. And this kind of goes back to what we said at the start, that, the earlier that you consider this stuff with the game that you're trying to make and what you're trying to code, ultimately is very important to the success of some of these games. And that actually leads me into a question about Steam Remote Play, but I just want to get your thoughts on my little rambling first.
Yeah. Because one thing you can do is you can have the multiplayer be entirely peer-to-peer, but you can basically have one server which is just a matchmaking, which is kind of coordinating people. So someone can create a game and you can just say, I want to join any old game that's going on, and you can have, so rather than having to host the actual servers themselves, you just need some kind of system that will coordinate different clients to sort of get everybody into a game. And you then, once that's set up, you're then back to just peer-to-peer. Because really, I guess what players are complaining about or had a problem with wasn't that there weren't any dedicated servers, but there was no matchmaking system. Was really what they were saying they wanted, I guess. But you can provide that without having to provide the actual servers yourself. You just need the matchmaking part.
Okay. And the other point I wanted to get before I forget, one of the big things that Steam kind of rolled out last year was this idea of remote play, or local remote couch play, which is the idea that the players connect to each other through Steam. Essentially, I'm streaming my setup to another player or players. And again, I'm sure you don't have any detail about the internal workings of that, but from your own standpoint, I guess, how hard is something like that to fathom or to even build?
Yeah, I guess anything where you're sort of playing remotely and kind of the video is being streamed to you. Again, one of your big challenges is just sending that much data in a timely fashion. Because that was it Go Live that had a little box that kind of did all the hardware, all the video decoding for you to make it faster or something. It was a tricky enough problem. They wanted you to buy a dedicated bit of hardware to make it work. And so anything where you're receiving the image over a stream and you're trying to get that done quickly enough that you can still respond quickly enough for your playable. That's the big challenge, which is, I hesitate to say it's just the bandwidth and video compression problem. That seems a little unreasonable, but again, it makes your game. I suppose when you're streaming, when you can do that to absolutely any game on Steam, suddenly a game where developers didn't have to worry about, can I deal with lag tolerance? It's a single player game. It's a local co-op game. It doesn't matter. Suddenly putting some extra lag in there could make it awkward to play, I guess, because it's out of the developer's hands. So, yeah, it's no mean feat, and there's a lot of data moving around. It's not something I've really sort of thought about in terms of how I try and structure such a thing. Yeah.
All right. And then Mr. Elwood asks, how hard is it to do peer-to-peer today?
Once you've got the... So one problem we face is just establishing the connections between two people, because sort of getting incoming connections to people's sort of home computers can be tricky. So that's one thing you need to... There's a thing called NAT punch through. You have to there's a way of sort of getting a connection sort of out past the fact that somebody might not have a public IP address, but you still want to talk to their computer directly. But then once it's working, it should, once you've got that connection set up, it should work fine. And when it comes to, if you've got a 6-way game, sort of you may end up with a connection. You got a choice. You either have a star or a grid. So either one player's machine happens to be effectively the server, and everyone talks to them, and then they send their messages out, or everyone's sending all their messages to everyone else. Which one you go with, probably depending exactly what the game is. What extent a server needs to be running a simulation to kind of keep everything in check, so it needs all the data, and then it decides what happens and tells everybody else what happened. For that, you probably want a star. So those are the two setups you might have. But once you've worked out how to get those connections established, it shouldn't be too difficult, I don't think.
Okay. And he was also saying the same thing about like firewalls and connection problems as well, kind of causing a wrinkle there.
Yeah. I mean, part of the problem is that the world has run out of IPv4 addresses, and nobody wants to splash the cache on the hardware to make IPv6 happen everywhere. And so I think there are people who are being double natted by their ISP. So there's maybe the box at the end of their street, where their sort of connection goes in, has an IP address, and they've all then got IP addresses to their house, and then within their house, the router's giving them a different IP address kind of internally. And so getting through that chain of events to really establish a connection can be tricky. It's been a long time since I had to look into this, just because of the nature of RuneScape isn't this kind of game. And none of the ones we've done at Jagex have been that kind of game. So I can't offer any sort of. I mean, this is like advice which is like 10 years out of date since the last time we looked at it. So, yeah, I'm probably not the best person to ask about that particular style of networking, I'm afraid.
Okay. And I guess for you, are there any other topics regarding server architecture, maintaining, building, anything along those lines that we haven't discussed yet?
I guess one thing is having a good strategy for updating your game.
Okay.
Which to a certain extent you need anyway. Cause I mean, even if you're just uploading a build to Steam and pushing the button, you need some strategy for that. For like, what happens if it goes wrong? But there's a saying that goes around, which is that everyone has a test environment. Some people are lucky enough to have a separate environment to run their live game in. So definitely do everything you can to set up what we tend to call a staging environment, which is as close as possible an exact replica in sort of shape, if not scale, of your live environment. So you've got a copy of your master matchmaking server and several game servers and your profile server and so on. You've got a copy of all of that with running on the same hardware, ideally with the same firewall rules, so that you don't end up with any nasty surprises when it turns out servers can't talk to each other in live. Make absolutely as much as you can. Make a copy of your live environment just without as many servers, and then you have a testing stage where you make sure it works on there. And when it works on there, you're then confident when you push it to the live environment, everything's the same and it's just going to work. Because the live deploy is the last point, absolute last moment you want to realize anything's wrong. You don't want any surprises going live. So yes, do that. Would be my prime advice for that. Because you need a strategy for, if we sort of deploy to the new version of the server to all the physical servers, and then none of them will start up for some reason, we don't know why yet, we haven't fixed it. How quickly can you say deploy the old version to get players back in the game? And have you now got a problem where you updated the server software, not realizing it wouldn't boot? You've already pushed the new version of the client on Steam, and now you've booted the old servers up, and the new clients won't connect to the old servers. Can you deal with that problem? So you need to work out what your fallback strategies are, and to what extent client version 9 can talk to server version 8 or the other way around. There'll be some times, of course, when it can't, because version 9 might have a change that both need to know about, and that may be fine. But if possible, make sure you can talk to sort of previous versions. So that's because I think players will forgive you pretty quickly, I think, for a live update screw up the first couple of times, but when it's once a month or whatever, you very quickly start to run the goodwill dry. So you need to be on top of that. That's a very important part of your relationship with your players.
And I guess there's one thing that I've wondered about myself. One of the things that we've seen, especially from legacy games that are 10, 15, 20 years, or probably I think I think what World of Warcraft is now like 16 years old at this point.
Hmm.
Is the idea of updating? Oh, excuse me, my voice is dying. Is the idea of updating your engine or changing the engine of your game? Maybe it's from a graphical standpoint. Maybe there's just better engines that can handle your game faster or more streamlined. When a developer considers these kinds of server changes, I'm sorry, not server changes, engine changes, does that or will that impact the servers that you're using or how the server architecture works?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of a game that's sort of totally overhauled its engine, kind of post-release. It's partly because it's just such a risky proposition,
Yeah.
and also you're then spending a lot of effort and time redeveloping an engine, which is presumably people taken away from putting new features in the existing game, and so the impact on that is a lot. So when we moved to the native client for RuneScape rather than the Java client, we hired a whole extra team who worked just on that, so that wasn't taking people away from the regular maintenance and updates of RuneScape itself. So the rollout of NXT of that client was a big thing, and we basically came down to a lot of betas and ironing out all the kinks. I mean, I think the level of risk means that people haven't really got an appetite for it, I would guess. I mean, it could be done. I mean, one thing we've talked about for RuneScape is so that the scripting language is run on a script interpreter, which we've written in Java, which runs inside the server. So you've got the server source code includes the script runner, which then executes the scripts. And we could make script execution faster if we converted to something like a Lua solution that someone mentioned before, or just compiling the scripts down to Java and executing them natively. But my goodness me, the effort in rewriting the script runner and being sure it was exactly the same would be one thing, but also then just asking everyone to rewrite all the scripts. So we'd probably have to run both systems in parallel, and that gets really awkward, because making sure script run in the correct order is a challenge in itself. It's a thing we've talked about, but it always looks like such a big job that it's never the most pressing thing, because it would mean putting a load of other features on hold.
Yeah. And as you were saying like a few minutes ago, with kind of games that, like, what happens, like having a test bed or a test client, I've heard people use the term stress test a few times to kind of describe some of the stuff they do. Is it possible, again, this is a very stupid question, is it possible to like kind of trick your server or the workers like convincing the server that there's 100,000 people signing on, see how the server handles that kind of load?
Yeah, so we did that with Chronicle. We knocked up a little test bot that would just create a load of connections and then play the game in a super basic way. It would just like put a card down, wait a bit, put another card down, and so on. And we then sort of worked out, well, how many thousand games does it look like we can run? And that can be very good for showing up any obvious bottlenecks, and it can maybe help you if you then profile the server while this is going on. That might give you hints onto what's slow and what kind of thing isn't. But also you'll see, well, are we going to run out of RAM before we run out of CPU? That kind of scaling. It shows you how things work. It's always a bit risky though, because your sort of simulated load is never going to be quite like real load, and so there's always a risk that you'd miss something. So that's why you tend to get games doing what they often call technical betas, where they just want to throw a load of real people at their server and see what happens. So that's a useful thing to do, because then you're taking the guesswork out of, is my simulation of load realistic? You've kind of got some real people at it. The other thing you can do in terms of sort of automation is you can have so RuneScape is a combat lab, so we can run builds through a whole bunch of clapped out laptops with like Intel chips in them, and different versions of Windows and that kind of thing, and make sure everything works. And we can see if it turns out we've just tanked the frame rate on this particular graphics card or something for some reason. Off that aside, that's not a server issue, but that's also another thing you can do. And that's the kind of thing you can hire. Actually, you can sort of hire combat testing as a service, if you don't want to, because obviously maintaining one of those, it makes sense for a Jagex to do it, but it doesn't make sense for an indie to have one entire room of their house full of racks of old laptops or something. So yeah, it's another thing to consider is trying to automate testing your game for load. An interesting story actually, which isn't server related, but is to do with automated testing, is that the guys who wrote the Talos principle made a bot that could play the game.
Yeah.
It wasn't clever enough to solve the puzzles, but they sort of told it how to do everything. And that meant, and it could play them very quickly because when it was running, they took the brakes off the physics engine. They could run it as fast as the CPU could cope with. And so if they then broke a level by like putting a pillar in the wrong place and now you can't bounce a laser from here to here, it would spot that very quickly.
Yeah.
And they reckoned over the life of the game, it did something like 15,000 hours of playtesting, which is a phenomenal value. So again, that's another way that automation is a good thing.
Yeah, I spoke with Crow Team about that. I think it was like 3 years ago, maybe more than that. That was a very fascinating conversation about building that game up.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I just had a question. I do want to get to Mr. Elwood's question. Actually, I'll get to his first, and then I'll see about getting to mine. What about outage procedures? Like, what do you do when the server is burning? Like, how do you prepare for that?
Yeah, yeah. So we have a whole call-out process at Jagex where one of the engine developers will be on call, and so they sort of need to be near a phone and a particular special laptop that can log in from outside the building, kind of at all times. And so for that week, you kind of have to build your life around being on call. You can't go to the cinema. You can't drink 2 glasses of wine because then you can't drive to the office if it comes to it. So yeah, and there's and we have kind of 24-hour support for the game anyway because there's people. Doing. I mean, there's very limited sort of out-of-hours support for players, but there are some people checking. People can't log into their accounts and that kind of thing. There's a lot of monitoring that goes on, so there's always someone checking that. We've got a back-end web page that sort of says what's red and what's fine. So they're monitoring that. They monitor Reddit for players saying, "Oh, we can't log in," and so if they encounter a problem like that, they just get on the phone to whichever one of us is on call, and we then boot up and sort of dig around and see what's going on. And it might be, I mean, it's hard to know. It could be one of any number of things. Some server ran out of memory for some reason. We don't know why. All we do at 4 a.m. is we, just get it running again, and we'll worry about, a better fix tomorrow or later that day. So we have a call-out process for that. And in fact, it's not just the engine team. So, if the billing system went down, then somebody in that department would get a phone call. It might actually be that things going down, we have to pass the call on to the sysadmins and they need to deal with a sort of infrastructure problem. But, the player support guys, just don't have, and we can't really give them enough information for them to work out whether it's an engine thing or it's a sysadmin thing. So they ring us and then we move it on if we need to. But there's a whole sort of play sheet for, if this is offline, do this. If this is offline, do this. If this is on offline, that's fine. We'll fix it in the morning. Please don't call us. We're asleep. And that's a process that sort of gets refined over time. If something was offline and didn't get called out because it had sort of fallen through the cracks in the process, we then sort of update the thing the next day and so on. So again, that's something else that over many years we've kind of refined down to a pretty slick process. But you just need some kind of monitoring system. In fact, we did actually have a point where some of the monitoring went automatic. So we had a system that would then send emails about certain kinds of problem, rather than waiting for a human to spot it, which was fine until the night when the error reporting automated email system crashed. That happened. That really did happen. Our automated call-out system crashed.
It's bad when the outage system has an outage.
Yeah, it's good.
Now, I guess one other question I was thinking about, as we said, like with like legacy games that have been around for a long time, that if you have to change your servers, or if you have to update the servers or the server hardware itself, I guess, is there anything like interesting or important for developers to consider if they have to go that route?
Yeah, so you ought to be. If you've got a successful game, you need to be, sort of rotating your servers every now and then. After about 3 years, your server runs the risk of just hard drive crashing or something exploding, so you want to sort of refresh them every now and then anyway, and so that's the point at which where you want hopefully a system in front of that, so you can kind of invisibly take a server off without anyone really noticing. Depending on your setup, that might be harder than other things. So sort of in WoW, where you're locked to a particular realm server, if that server's offline, I mean, I imagine it's all virtualized, I would guess is how they've done it. So if a server fails, they can spin up that world on a different physical machine. But if you sort of lock people to particular servers, you've got a problem if you can't turn those off without someone noticing. But there are enough RuneScape worlds, and they're all identical, that we can shut some of them down and that's okay. And then essentially you have the new server provisioned and ready to go. And really, you kind of have everything set up, and hopefully, getting people to stop connecting to this server and start connecting to that server should just be a case of a DNS change or something, and then you can then start up the new version, and players can get in pretty much immediately. So you do all the work up front, turn the old one off, turn the new one on, and hopefully the downtime is next to nothing, and then the old server can go to the tip or whatever it is you're going to do with it. So yeah, yeah. So if your infrastructure supports you. Sort of swapping things out with minimum visibility to the players, then that's a definite advantage.
Okay. One other question I was thinking about from earlier regarding like different regions and setting things up along those lines. As a developer, like obviously, like you want to cover like where your major fan base is or where your major consumer base is, but how do you decide? Like we're talking about a worldwide release of a game, where do you want kind of your servers to be set up, like regionally wise?
Yeah, I mean, we've gone. I mean, there are particularly in America, there are some places it makes good financial sense to put your servers because they've kind of set themselves up tax wise to encourage people to set up all their data centers in those places. So, like Vegas is one place. There are an awful lot of servers in Vegas. Yeah. I mean, but basically, it's I guess about population density. So like a lot of people, we have servers on the west coast of America and servers on the east coast of America, and nothing in the middle because what I gather that's not where most of the people are in America. Australia often gets the short end of the stick because internet sort of into and out of Australia is pretty poor. They don't have particularly big lines sort of going into and out of the country. So we actually have a data center in Australia. You mentioned that before. I forgot about it. There we go. Sorry, Australia. We have a data center in Australia as well, although that's set up slightly differently for legacy reasons. So that's the reason we have a data center in Australia is because getting them to connect to otherwise it'd be the Las Vegas one is particularly painful for them because internet out of Australia, internet within Australia is fine, but out of Australia is awful. So that's another reason to do it. And I guess it's going to depend on where you think your customers are. If you know that the kind of game you've built is going to particularly appeal to a Far Eastern market, have some servers in South Korea or Japan or something. So we've gone all in for Europe and America, because that's where we know the players are, plus Australia.
All right. I think with that, I have a few more questions for you, Chris, and then I would say maybe like another 15, 20 minutes, at least from what I have. And for chat, if you have any questions for Chris about server architecture, online architecture, anything like that, please get them in. This will be kind of, I think, a last call for questions. So, I think talking a little bit more specifically from the independent standpoint, or from the indie dev standpoint, as you said, like you started your own indie game company, you're trying to build your first game, and if there's one thing that I've heard like a lot of developers say as kind of like a lesson when it comes to starting out is don't do multiplayer as your first game. So, I guess, like as somebody who has built server architectures and looked at things from the back end, I guess, what do you say in terms of if somebody wants to, go against the grain and say, you know what, I want my first game, I want to make a multiplayer focused title. How, I guess, what tips or guidelines would you give them starting out?
Well, I guess, we've already sort of touched on, there's different sort of scales of difficult depending on what your multiplayer is. If it's local multiplayer on a console, that's a much easier. If you're building a full MMO, I think, to be honest, if someone's saying straight out of the gate, I want to build a full MMO, I don't care how determined they are to do it. I think it's probably a bad idea. Like, just seriously, take a step back, think about what you're trying to. Can you really? Have you bitten off more than you can chew? That's the phrase I'm looking for. Expect. As always is the case, it's better to take longer than you think. Make sure you've got a team big enough to pull it off. So you're going to have some people doing nothing but writing servers for the entire length of that project. I mean, I guess anything more specific than that would depend on what the game was. But I think, are you sure? Would probably be my first question. Are you really, really sure? Um, except because also, I guess the question is, what the budget is part of it, right? So how much money you've got at your disposal. If you're going to run this thing out of a Kickstarter, then what you're going to have to ask for is going to be far greater because of just the number of people you have to pay to do stuff. Plus, you've got your server costs and so on as well. Yeah. So, yeah. The phrase I've used sort of in my own head, talking to myself about this, is "don't drown in your own ambition." Um,
I think a lot of developers have to be told that. Sharky in chat asked, where are the best places to get servers from?
Physical servers? Oh, that is a good question. So, I mean, RuneScape servers just come from one of the big vendors because we got a good deal with them. We have had a relationship with them for years, and they give us a good rate. Obviously, that's not a particularly useful answer for anybody watching this. Yeah, I mean, the stuff I'm doing at the moment, I've got a couple of virtual private servers from a company that's set up in the UK. And the way I went about that was I was looking at various hosting providers, and lots of them are saying like, yeah, you're on a website, that's cool, we'll help. But this one particular place was saying, right, we've got a data center in London, we've got triple redundancy lines in and out, we've got this, that, and the other, we've got this, that, that. You guys are talking my language. You actually sound like your sysadmins. And I think the first support ticket I ever sent them was on like a Saturday, and they answered me within like half an hour or something. I was like, oh, okay, you guys are really on top of this. So yeah, I basically went with them because they talked like they knew what they were doing. If you want to literally buy servers, I'm not sure I can. I write the software at Jagex. Someone else does all that stuff, so I don't have any particular wisdom to share.
All right.
Yeah.
I think he said where to rent them from. To
Rent
clarify.
them. Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, the people I'm using in the UK are called Xylo with an X. He seemed to do a pretty good job, but yeah, I don't have any sort of particular wisdom. And also, if you may want to consider, am I going down the Amazon cloud route? In which case, you've got the big cloud providers, whether it's Amazon or Azure or whatever. But I sort of looked for hosting providers till I found one that seemed right, and then I stopped looking. So I'm not sure I've got any more I can say than that.
Okay. Let's see anything else coming in. All right. Yeah. So from like an indie standpoint, I guess here's a question that I'm kind of curious about. One of the things that I've seen from some indie developers is to make very experimental or very unique multiplayer experiences, such as one game that was kind of like one player was guiding another player using a map or using like hacking tools to kind of like help the other player around. And we've seen, again, like the creativity from the indie space has been one of the most amazing things over the last decade. When we talk about games that feature very esoteric or very unique systems, so let's say we're not making, a bread and butter FPS, MMO, just something completely experimental or new, does that have any impact on the multiplayer architecture side of things?
That's a very good question. I guess these games are probably going to be relatively small in terms of just the number of players involved at any one time. So you're probably not going to need a server that's got a huge amount of grunt to it, or you're not trying to make a 64-way FPS, right? So it's more straightforward. And again, the same questions of, is it co-op? How much do I have to worry about people cheating? That kind of thing comes up. Yeah, I mean, something that is sort of a little bit out there. I mean, to a certain extent, you're just sending data back and forth. I mean, that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but some bits of it, like, am I going to use some sort of reliable UDP? Am I going to use TCP/IP? That's just going to depend on how responsive the whole thing's got to be for the gameplay to work. The style of the game is less crucial at that point. And the same things about how much code can I sensibly share between the client and the server to save myself some development effort and to just reduce the likelihood of bugs creeping in because they're doing different things. You still want to do that as much as you can. Hmm. The other question is, I suppose, if you're doing something that is sort of a niche game, then this could be wrong. It's speculation, but it may well be that it's not the kind of game with that's focusing on long-term progression and so on. So, do you even need a profile system, or is it just that you pick it up and play it, and it's one game is the same as the next, barring how the player's interactive? There's no sort of unlocks or anything. You haven't got to deal with that kind of persistence end of things. So I suppose that in particular, that particular mechanic of am I unlocking stuff over time, and is that being stored somewhere? That's a solid chunk of your architecture, is do I need to keep this data sticking around somewhere? So that's going to depend on exactly what game you're making. Yeah.
And again, like as we said, there's so many like interesting hurdles when it comes to doing this, and a lot of it really comes down to what your plan is as a developer. Because as we said, there are many ways to you have TCP/IP, you have peer-to-peer, you have servers, and a lot of it really comes down to, I guess, it seems like kind of like the scope of what you're aiming for your multiplayer. Because if you're, as you said, if you're building like a simple like 2D beat 'em up where two players can just play together like that, that's not going to be as complicated as you said about building a full-on live service game with you're gonna have weekly updates, profiles, and things to manage along those lines.
Yeah, very much so.
All right. So I think with that, I guess a few just like general questions for you. Then maybe we can wrap things up. And again, I think it's been a really great chat. Again, I am not the hardware guy here. I talk more about design, but it's still very fascinating. Again, these are important considerations for developers, regardless of what you're trying to build. Because again, like we've seen developers say, I want to make my first game be this MMO open world space odyssey. It'll be bigger than Minecraft and Star Citizen, and I'll have it all done in 2 years.
We all want to make that game.
Yeah. And Shark, who came in late, we already had a discussion about how no, you can't build a multiplayer system in a weekend. It just doesn't work like that. So, for you, I guess, excuse me, what kind of game are you making as your first game with SideQuest Ninja?
Yeah, so I'm making not a multiplayer game. Is the first thing to say. So I'm making a puzzle game. It's very much a Zack-like. It's kind of inspired by things like Space Chem and that kind of thing. And stepping back, so the reason I did that is because a puzzle game has a very tight scope, and also it's not very big on assets. So the funding I need to make a full game, is much less than it might be for something else, because a lot of the fun, the creativity comes out of designing the puzzles rather than a lot of assets. So it's you are in charge of a series of factories, and those factories make cubes. And what you have to do is put all the devices that make cubes into workstations, then program those workstations to do things in the right order to make the right kind of cube. So your cube comes in and it's sort of all made of metal, but the customer wants this side painted red, this panel taken off and replaced with some glass, bunch of something putting inside it. And you need to do that and ship that off to them. And then the challenge is how efficiently can you do that? And so the game is going to track. There is going to be a server involved. So the game's going to track the stats of your personal best and how you've done compared to everybody else in the world, and it'll track what's the record for the shortest number of steps this someone did this puzzle in and that kind of thing. So that's not multiplayer, but it is a sort of a persistent server thing. So it's I'd love to have something concrete to show you. It's very early days, so I've literally yesterday took receipt of a bunch of models off the 3D so although I'm a solo dev, I can't draw, let's face it, so I'm hiring freelancers to do the art and the sound and that kind of thing. That's where my budget's going. So I took a receipt of a load of stuff yesterday, and I was doing the picture game thing yesterday. It's I'm like 2 days off being able to show some really cool screenshots. This is really frustrating. So in fact, I did. Let me just say hi in the chat. Hang on. The SideQuest Ninja. There you go. There's my account. I decided, even though I didn't have a game that was anything other than just like quads and cubes. I wanted to make a trailer, so I made I printed out a load of the concept art and made a stop motion version of the game on my desk over about 2 days and released that. So if you want to see kind of roughly what the game's like, go and have a look at that. But it's all about, basically it's about programming effectively in a factory. So you'll be able to manipulate cubes, rotate them, move them, teleport them, do things to them, hit them, fire lasers at them. So if you fire a laser, it'll sort of give a return if it hits something that's the same color as the laser, and that way you can influence the state of the factory based on the state of the cubes, and the laser will travel outside its own workstation. So a cube way over here can influence what this workstation over here is doing, and so on, allowing you to do some sort of cool stuff. And then it's all about efficiency. Oh, and there's a conspiracy to take over the galaxy, but you sort of fix that on the way.
Okay. Just in between everything else, I know.
as you go. Yeah.
I guess where did the idea come from to do a Zack-like? I just love how developers are now describing
I know
Zack's games as Zack-likes now.
Yeah. I only came across that as a concept about a week or two ago. I hadn't realised people were doing that. I was just calling it a puzzle game until that point. I think a puzzle game of some kind for me hit the sweet spot of being what are the kinds of games I really like and a scope I can cope with. And so I think that's probably about the only thing on the Venn diagram that kind of works, because I also really like playing RPGs and FPSs. I thought this is too much for me to do by myself. But a puzzle game is very much kind of my thing, and small, or achievably small anyway.
Yeah, and with kind of designing, kind of like coming up with like the pulse philosophy and stuff like that. I guess what kind of design are you like, or what kind of like pulse philosophy, I guess, is going to be built into your game? Like, is it going to be something that is very much like a black or white kind of thing, or you say it's going to be more like a Zachtronics game where it's very much open ended in terms of like the solution?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm not planning to make a game where finishing the level is hard. You'll be able to do it with some sort of varying quality of solution. But then because for me, I mean, even when it's not a Zack-like game, I quite like optimizing stuff. I mean, it carries over from my job. That's why I like my job, as I get to do that kind of thing. And so for me, the real challenge is how much can I squeeze out of this. And you get people. There are people in the office who are saying, "Oh, I've done this task 100 level quicker." Is it task or whatever it's called? TRS 100 level slightly faster than you, and then then someone then comes back 2 weeks later and says, "Oh, I've shaved another tick off it," and that kind of like just how much can I squeeze out of this is that's for me where the real fun of the game is. I mean, obviously getting through it is fun, and you get to sort of see the plot as you go. But
yeah, I'm sure all my friends are just hackers when they play all of Zach's games. They can all do things like 30 seconds faster than me. I'm sure they're just all hacking. They're all just using the same hacks. That actually brings up another question I want to ask you about. Regarding server architecture with hacks and cheats and such, that there are people, as we said, like, in a perfect world, nobody would try and hack the system and everything would be nice and friendly. But how do you protect, like, people who come up with, like, specific aimbots or make use of, like, popular tools like that? How do you protect your game along those lines?
Yeah. I mean, you've got there's sort of two main thrusts, I guess. So you've got stuff like the Valve anti-cheat, and you've got BattleIron, that kind of thing, and those are actually running bits of script on your machine, trying to spot you doing weird stuff you shouldn't be doing. And you can even get, I think, some FPSs, and at server RAM, you can even push a button, and your PC will send a screenshot of what you're doing to them, and they can see what's going on. And so that is, in some ways, that feels really inelegant, because you're just kind of, it's a kind of belt and braces kind of can we catch you in the act kind of approach to things. But it happens because there isn't really much we can do that's better, because a lot of, particularly with stuff like FPS, like a lot of the hacks you're doing don't leave a very clear fingerprint on the server, right? If I'm just moving my mouse,
super fast or
whatever. Well, so some things you can. So if you were tracking mouse position and it's like the mouse only ever moves in a dead straight line, it moves weirdly quickly. That you could, with some heuristics, you could work that out. But then sophisticated ones just move the mouse in a curve and off you go. So so you can do something on the server, but you're trying to spot people in the act of things that aren't obvious from the server side. Also, there are things you can do on the server. So, I mean, RuneScape is, I can't say too much about what we do, but we have a lot of analytics, sort of analysing player behaviour and seeing what people do in game and then trying to spot dodgy behaviour. So we can spot gold farming networks and that kind of thing, or account hijacking from suspicious behaviour. If an account suddenly logs in from somewhere it's never logged in before and starts offloading all its wealth, it's probably been hacked. So there are server side things you can do, but and exactly which one we're going to go with is probably going to depend on exactly what the game is. We can do much more, particularly actually because RuneScape is such a, sort of I was saying, it's all about asking the server for permission for everything. It's much easier for us to do a lot of stuff on the server than it is in other games. So it's the two-pronged approach of do what you can on the server, because all the other thing is, of course, when you're then sort of doing stuff in battle or whatever, people can kind of watch it. They can watch us watching them, right? So then they can work out how it works and they can try and get around it. And of course, the real problem is the massive financial incentive there is to defeat all these systems, whether it's I can sell a hack that hasn't been spotted yet in CSGO or something, or on sort of the RPG side of I can farm a lot of gold and I can sell it for real money. So that's why it carries on, right?
Yes.
But people can make money, so they want to keep doing it. We keep going because we want a game to be, clean, not full of bots, etc.
Oh yes, and then there's of course that great argument about using more intrusive anti-cheat software, and then you get into issues of people who don't want a spy or a bot on their computer monitor what they do, as we saw with there's a recent gaffe with Bethesda in Doom Eternal, where they updated the game to feature, I think it was an anti-cheating software that on a single player game that you couldn't play the single player game without it, and insanity ensued there.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, people say, I don't know exactly what this thing does. It downloads code from the internet to run at strange times. But then again, so does most stuff you install off the internet. And if someone wants to, do something malicious, they probably can. How much software is there on your computer that auto updates like Discord does, right? So if someone that has happened, I think some bit of software somebody hacked into it and hacked the update server, so then the next update contained some sort of spyware. So anything you've got on your computer, there's a certain level of trust there. And there's no reason to think that people trying to do anti-botting stuff are any more malicious than anybody else. Although not letting you play a single-player game without it does seem a little over the top. And that's one of the reasons also. It's just not a very elegant solution, but it's kind of the best we've got in some ways.
Okay.
I think that's been the other option actually, is you've got stuff like Stadia, where you're not even playing the game on your machine at all, and you're just sort of sending the input over and it comes back, and therefore you can't dig into the memory on the client and see what's what. You haven't got that access.
And that is probably another discussion right there too about Stadia and that kind of running it through like the cloud. Let's see. Mr. Elwood asks, have you tried in RuneScape to train AI based on data for spotting hackers?
I mean, quite what the data science guys get up to, I'm not sure. They do a lot of things. They produce a lot of pretty graphs of many things that I've looked at. But, I think actually, if I did know, I probably couldn't tell you. So, there are several of them. They're very good at what they do. Quite how they do it, I don't know. And I probably can't say too much anyway. Sorry.
All right. So I think with that, I think I am about out of question. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's popping up. I guess anything on your end, whether about your upcoming or the game that you're working on, or with our topic in general that you would like to bring up.
I think we've kind of touched on most of the big subjects in server development. There's nothing sort of glaring I wanted to mention. What is there to say about my game? It's ongoing. I'm streaming the development on Twitch, so if you want to watch a game dev do his thing, that's the thing you can do. If you, you can find you've seen I've popped my little my account up in the chat, the Sidequest Ninja. From there, you can find my Twitter, put you in touch with my Twitch and that kind of thing, so you can kind of follow that chain down if you want to kind of see what I do and follow the game. Yeah, I've discovered, having talked to many artists, that the budget I have doesn't make all the assets I need, even for the puzzle game. So at some point there'll be a Kickstarter, but that's some way off. Yeah, but I don't want to make it into a big marketing pitch. But if you like puzzle games, you like Zacklar games, give it a look. I hope you'll enjoy it. I'm certainly enjoying making it. Every now and then, a mechanic kind of appears out of nowhere, and I suddenly realise. So there's a you can paint cubes, and there's a spray painter that just like sprays aside. There's a dropper which like just drops a big blob of paint, and that will keep going until it hits something. So that can paint something outside its own workstation. And I realised a few days ago that when you fire lasers, obviously they reflect off coloured surfaces, and there's a colour panel you can just like put in the way, so if it doesn't hit a cube, it hits a panel. And I realised if you drop paint onto a panel, that'll change the colour of the panel. I need to implement that. But also, if you fire a laser and a bit of paint drops past and the laser hits the paint, that will give a return. And I realised that today. It's like, oh, there's a whole mechanic in there which is just like falls out of the way things work, and I hadn't even spotted it. And like it's weird having to learn how to play my own game. That's a lot of fun. That's really satisfying when that happens. Like,
Yeah.
oh yes, this happens. Yes, this is really cool. So I'm enjoying making it and discovering how it works. Yeah, so do join me on the journey if you want. But yeah, I think I've said everything I wanted to say.
A wild game mechanic appears.
pretty much. Yeah. It's great.
All right. I think that is about. Yes. Here's the final question. Then we'll do like our official wrap up. Then. So, do you have anything you would like to say to any indie developers watching, or anyone in particular who is thinking about multiplayer or going down this route? Like, any words of wisdom you'd like to end like this discussion on?
I think once again, are you sure is the big one. Yeah, and then be aware of it's not just multiplayer is this much work. Is it local and so on. And so yeah, and remember not just that your design will affect your architecture, but your architecture is going to have impact on your design, and the kind of architecture you afford may have to drive your design. And so don't whatever you do, don't treat multiplayer as an afterthought. Consider it from day one, and then work out what you can do with the resources you have. But whatever you make, I hope it's cool, and I wish you well. And if it's multiplayer, maybe we'll have a game someday.
All right. So with that, just some final wrap-up questions for you. So in terms of social media, you mentioned, of course, SideQuest Ninja. Any other places you would like to mention, or places people can find you at?
Well, so SideQuest Ninja is the sort of the studio social, although it's actually just me posting. There's also Twitter, Taranam, TARRENAM. In fact, I'll spell it in the chat. That's actually that's sort of me. So if you want to sort of hear me talking about game dev stuff, but also painting Warhammer figures, go with that. Also, you've got my YouTube channel link there. There's a mailing list which I've just set up, so you could be the first person who isn't me or my wife to sign up to it. Yeah, and if there's a link to that from my from the SideQuest Ninja Twitter. SideQuestNinja.com exists as there's a dev blog on there. I've written posts about how I'm going. I'm going to kick off video logs as well any day now. Also, the first thing I did when I set up a company was I spent a very long time configuring a mail server. So if you want a 20,000 word blog post and a 90-minute YouTube video on how to configure a mail server with all the bells and whistles, you can do that too. I've got those. So yeah, so we say Twitter, website, YouTube. Yeah, that pretty much covers it. Oh, Twitch. Yeah, so Twitch is also Taranam, if you want to watch me doing game dev stuff.
Okay. And Mr. Ores in chat, do you have a Discord channel or Discord for your game?
No, not yet. I haven't set up a server. No, I'm mostly. I'm sort of. I could. I'm sort of the stage of building up a community on Twitter. So I think right now the server is pretty quiet. But yeah, so something I will get around to, and I'll then start sharing links and all the existing social stuff for that. And there are various Discords I'm in. Indie World Order, obviously the Game Wisdom stuff. If you want to come and find me, I'm around there. So. All
right. So I think with that will do it for our chat. So Chris, again, thank you so much for coming on. I think this was a very interesting chat, and definitely best of luck with your game.
Thank you very much. You're very welcome. It was enjoyable. Thanks to everyone who asked a question. It was great to chat to all of you. Yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
All right. And if you're free in the future, like to come back on and talk more about the game or more about multiplayer, let me know.
Sure. Sounds good.
All right. So for those of you watching this right now, we're going to end the podcast here. I'll include links to Chris's social media in the description down below. And if you are a developer working on an upcoming game or just want to chat design with me and you are interested, please get in touch. We are currently scheduling time throughout the summer. So I will be back on later for our regular game streams. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. And until our next chat, have a great night. Take care, everybody.